So here was castles and castanets and the smoke of gypsy campfires, all in perfect unity. And to finish off about my impressions of Pedrell, when Isaac Albéniz, of course, much earlier, and Granados studied with Pedrell, both composers were really motivated by that double aspect of Andalusian folklore, nationalism, and artistic tradition. And of course, these composers were convinced that Spanish music was born to be danced.
You know, it's interesting because from this generation of Manuel de Falla and the composers that you mentioned thereafter, and I'm curious to know how this affected other regions too, but as I didn't really say much about myself, I have spent many years dedicated to the piano works of Joaquín Rodrigo, and he was a part of the later group of the generaciones, the generation of composers, and I'm talking about musicians here just because it's my area of expertise. But and in his group, he was also a member of the Generación of 1927 and 1927, this group that you mentioned. But he has been said to have written that he wanted to experiment with the trends that they heard while being outside of Spain. And he said, quote, "My generation was European, a generation against this renaissance of Pedrell and of nationalism. The Andalusismo, that which is overtly portraying anything from Andalusia, annoyed us. My generation, we are dispersed because of the war, the Spanish Civil War. The group to this circumstance lost its unity of intention." And then Joaquín Rodrigo would go on to be outside of Spain and then make his way back to his own sense of nationalism, which was, in my opinion, a little bit broader in scope than that of Albéniz, Granados, and Falla. But it's interesting how it's still important. I think Rodrigo would say that the work of these forefathers was to the success of his works and to the unity of the country's ideals. Now, Roberto, you must have some ideas here with the monarchy and how this portrayed with culture in these times.
Yes, my interest.
I would like to also invite the two Spaniards on the stage. Well, Cecilia and the transplant American Spaniard down there who spent the last 30 years living in Madrid. If they could give us now their perceptions of Spanish nationalism as they live inside the country, and maybe, you know, for the 20th century, where is Spain headed culturally? Is there a unity now of Spanish people for what they represent musically, culturally? Let's hear some.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you, all of you, for all we have heard here, because it's amazing to hear you speaking about Spain here, now in El Paso. It's so well and so profound, and of so many different aspects. Well, it's difficult for me to express in English. Perhaps I will change from time to time to Spanish. All of what everything you said is totally right. Each of you in a different point of view is totally right. But I think now things have changed quite a lot in the last years. I think Nina knows quite well, and I think perhaps you have been recently in Spain, or living for a long, not just as a tourist, but just living. I think now, and this is very sad what I'm going to say, for many Spanish people or Spaniards now to say that we are from Spain, we are Spanish, is not very good. We are not seen as this is a very good thing. And this is so sad. I mean, for me, this is, I think, it's one of the saddest things that is happening to many of us when we're feeling and looking around, and this is like this. For example, I am a publisher, and we belong to an association of publishers, and we go out of Spain for fairs and exhibitions a lot, and we are sponsored by our governments. But the Spanish, the central government has not very much, they cannot give us many subsidies because they have every day less and less power. We belong, each region, or each autonomy is every day more independent. So when we go, for example, now, next month, to the Frankfurt Fair, the music fair, it's the most important in worldwide, we are not, our pavilion is not Spanish pavilion. We are called Sounds from Spain. We cannot say that we are from Spain. We are not Spanish anymore. And this is, I think, is terribly sad. I mean, no composer now would use any music as to remain that he's Spanish. That would be terrible. It's not anymore fashionable. Composers would call their composition in English, in Latin, in Greek or in Chinese, but not in Spanish, not in Espanol.
When you started talking about nationalism in Spain, I was just thinking that if we were in Madrid in the 21st century talking about nationalisms, people would be talking about regionalisms. Because today in Spain, when you talk about nationalisms, it's the Basque nationalists, the Catalan nationalists. Those are the two more radical. But they're also the Galician nationalists. And this is a little bit of the same line as Cecilia's saying. It's one of the tragedies in Spain today that it should be such a unified country, and it is. They want to emphasize their differences, but they haven't realized that their differences together make them strong. And I think Rodrigo was very conscious of the regionalisms in Spain. In fact, he has many compositions that exalt Galicia, exalt Andalusia, the plains of Castilla. There are so many. He was so conscious of the richness of the wealth of his country. And I think nationalism would be understood in his music in that sense. And I'm not sure what sense you're giving to nationalism, 20th century nationalism in Spain.
Well, it's interesting because it's sort of the theme is running through everybody's topic, is that we have not nationalism singular, but nationalisms plural, that we have different regions and different dance, different culture, and that we would like to experience all of them. But now we're finding out that in Spain, maybe that's being taken even to an extreme, that it's a separation instead of a unity, which is, I think, at least in music, there was a formal movement that started with Felipe Pedrell to unify composers, to give a representation of who we are as Spaniards. And I do think that Rodrigo is in the next line of that, although initially I think he resisted that because they didn't want to be seen as sort of old-fashioned in that sense.
I think it's because as well, when Rodrigo went back to Spain, and so many of the Spanish composers and dancers were already adrift because of the Spanish Civil War, the Spanish dancers abroad, unfortunately, were not familiar with Rodrigo works. And I think, wasn't it Pilar Lopez was the first Spanish dancer probably to do the choreography for the concerto de Aranjuez. And that was our loss here in the Americas, certainly. And but we know now, and I will say that Rodrigo certainly is the most representative Spanish composer of our age. And I would go to say he's the Mediterranean Greek in many, many ways. And his enlightened nationalism speaks volumes to Pedrell, really, and about Pedrell.
I agree, and I think I also agree with Catherine. In my research, I ran across that he would even take something like a Christmas carol that, yeah, it's provincial, but that everyone would know, and set music to that, and that the spirit of in the movie that we just saw, it's a spirit of maybe perhaps a pure Spain, is what Pepe Romero said, that it's very alive in his mind of the Spain, that it's not territorial, but of all the wonderful things that the country would have to offer.